Breaking in now to programmes to listen to Turkey's presidential spokesman Ibrahim Kalin. He's talking to journalists in Ankara after his meeting with US National Security Advisor John Bolton. So let's take a listen.
Thanks. Mr. Bolton, the US National Security Advisor, and other senior officials from the White House attended the meeting. We discussed the process and how it would continue. The decision, of course, we are happy with the decision of Mr. Trump to withdraw troops from Syria. But however, how it is going to be done, what will be left behind, and what will happen to the heavy arms left behind, and various other matters need to be clarified. We've discussed these matters in detail, and in the days to come, including today, our military officials and intelligence officials will continue their discussions. We continue our relationship with the United States as within the framework of allies, being allies, and we'll continue to do our best. I'd like to remind a number of things. First of all, Turkey's position in relation to the territorial integrity of Syria has not changed since day one. Another important principle is that the Syrian land must be cleared of all terrorists, including our border, regardless of what kind of terrorists they are. And the people who live in Syria, regardless of who they are, what their origin is, must be protected and saved from terrorist persecution and attacks. There is no question of stopping Turkey's fight or opposing Turkey's fight against terrorists and terror organizations. Turkey has been an important member of the international coalition fighting terror in Syria and has done its duty, a significant duty, in a very significant way. The PYD, YPG terrorist organizations, in addition to ISIL, are present in Syria. Therefore, both the opposition and the local elements' presence in Syria are considerable. As a result of what has been taking place in Syria, large numbers of people have returned to Trablus region. Afrin also is another area where people have felt safe enough to return. It is our position that Turkey has always done its duty to protect innocent people in Syria, including the Kurds, and Turkey will continue to act in this fashion. On the other hand, PKK and its Syrian arm, PYD, YPG, being used in the same sentence as under the umbrella of Kurds is not acceptable, and we have reacted to this way of the use of the word Kurds, and our president also has responded to this. Therefore, just to reiterate, PKK or its Syrian arm, YPD, PYG, cannot be the representatives of our Kurdish brothers and sisters, and this will be this position. Turkey has always worked hard to protect innocent people during its operations, military operations as well, while targeting terrorists in Syria. And I'd like to reiterate that our determined fight against terror and terrorist organizations and terrorists in Syria will continue. This will include PKK, PYD, YPG. It is important that we must not allow the terrorists to find new areas of opportunities by changes in the as a result of changes in Syria. However, the issue of providing support to PYD-YPG by the United States in Syria is continuing to be a problem. But we have stated, and I'd like to state here again, that our position is clear in relation to these organizations, the terrorist organizations. These terrorist organizations who carry out harassment and persecution of people, including the Kurdish people, in the areas where they are present. It is therefore any operations, any military and other operations by Turkey aims to provide peace and security for innocent people, civilian people in Syria, including innocent civilian Kurdish people in Syria. We've discussed other matters and the withdrawal of troops from Syria. And they also are supportive of this, but we'll see how it reflects in the actual site on land. As you know, Turkey's initiatives has prevented a humanitarian crisis in Idlib, and a safe and secure position was achieved in Idlib. In relation to the political process, we will continue especially in relation to the formation of a constitutional committee, we will continue to work with our friends and allies, and we'll remain in close contact. I'd like to reiterate this was the first of such meetings, and we will continue these meetings in relation to the withdrawal of US troops from Syria, how it's going to happen, its size and process and speed, etc., the pace of it, etc. So I'm ready to take your questions. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, has he turned down an application by Mr. Bolton to see him? Because there were reports that Mr. Bolton was going to have a meeting with President Recep Tayyip Erdogan during his visit to Turkey. And it is said that Mr. Bolton has left Ankara sooner than planned because he was not able to meet the president. And has the Americans given you any information as to the slowing down of the withdrawal of troops from Syria? Our president had not made a promise to Mr. Bolton to receive him. We'd never confirmed anything of the kind. As Mr. President has also said, Mr. Bolton's counterpart is known, and Mr. Bolton has had meetings with his counterparts and other officials also. But we should not consider or interpret this as a reaction. I talked to him about the concerns by giving him examples from Iraq, Syria, and other regional areas. And I gave him a folder containing our position. This is not just a matter of speech or rhetoric. It's becoming a serious concern, a serious mistake from time to time amongst our US counterparts. So it was necessary to make this point again, and which it was done. And our president has touched upon this It is known that we've opened our doors to the Kurdish Iraqi Kurds when there were problems in the northern Iraq. When Kobani Kurds were in difficulty, we've went to their help. When refugees headed towards Turkey, we did not discriminate amongst them on their ethnicity, etc. Therefore, to say that if Turkey will go in Syria and kill Kurds and massacre Kurds, this is a PKK propaganda, and the US administration should not fall for such propaganda. In Turkey, there are the Kurds live and operate freely. We have Kurdish lawmakers in our parliament, ministers and others. And these are all blatant facts, open facts, but they needed to be reminded of these facts, and we have done so. When United States administration declared the intention to withdraw troops from Syria, which stemmed from a telephone conversation between our President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and President Trump, as you know. At the time subsequent to that telephone conversation, we were given a period of 60 to 100 days. Now, there's a talk of 120 days, which is about 4 months, which is not a significant extension to the originally stated timetable. It is important, it's especially important how the United States is going to end its association with YPG elements in Syria, and in what fashion, etc. These are important matters that needs to be discussed and resolved. In photographs of your meeting with Mr. Bolton, you are seen to be handing a red folder to Mr. Bolton. What is the content? You talked about handing a folder to Mr. Bolton yourself just now, but what did it contain? Did it contain any photographs, etc.? Or is there going to be any telephone conversation between our president and the president of the United States? Yes, it is true. I gave a couple of folders to Mr. Bolton. One of them was contained a memo containing how Turkey embraces Kurdish citizens and Kurdish brothers in Turkey, Syria, Iran, Iraq, etc. The second one was in relation to something else, which was not covered by media. There were a number of areas in Syria under control of the YPG, which reports harassment and persecution of the locals by the YPG terrorists, and the way that they prevent them going to school, and other unacceptable treatment of people. So the second folder contained information, facts, in relation to the treatment of innocent civilians by the YPG terrorists in those areas. One of the reasons why a number of steps cannot be taken in Syria is because of the persecution that is currently being committed by YPG in Syria. They've done so against Yazidis, Soranis, and others, and also against Kurds. There are reports how children have been kidnapped by PKK and YPG, and how they were armed and forced to go to fight. This is a humanitarian, it's a crime against humanity. It's totally unacceptable. The second folder contained information about that to allow them to see what the real face of YPG is. it is possible that President and the President of the United States might have telephone conversations in the days to come soon. You have reacted to John Bolton putting YPG, PYD terrorists together with in the same basket as innocent civilian Kurdish people. What was the reaction to your reaction? There was a declaration by the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo saying that apparently, allegedly, that President Erdogan gave assurances to Mr. Trump in relation to what will happen after the withdrawal of US troops. We have discussed these matters, our reaction to the rhetoric in relation to the YPG, PYD and the Citizen Codes issue, and we expect that they have understood our position. This is not just a matter of rhetoric or the way of speech, but it's becoming a position, a stance. It needs to be addressed. Secondly, to answer your second question, there's no question of any assurances being given to the United States or the President of the United States. Or giving any assurances in relation to terrorist organizations is unacceptable, intolerable. Turkey cannot be expected to give assurances against a terrorist organization. So you spoke about arms being given to YPG, PYD by the United States. Have you received any assurances, undertakings from the US administration in relation to the fate of those weapons? We have discussed this matter in detail, but it will be the military delegations, military officials who will go into the detail of this matter. Obviously, our expectation is for the weaponry to be taken back, to be collected back from the PYD YPG. Leaving those weapons in the region is not harmful only for ourselves, but for the region as well. It is so for the region. So it is important that all weapons are cleared off, and military forces also cleared off, so that the land is handed over to civilian administrations. I asked my US counterparts specifically about this. Numbers have been given 16, 18, 20. I was told 16, but the work continues, and we'll see the outcome of it. The statements by Mr. Bolton in Israel are known. Has Mr. Bolton made any statements contradicting what he said while he was in Israel, or qualifying them in any way? In relation to the US bases in Syria, have there been any discussions in relation to the bases being left to Turkey, for Turkey to take over those bases once US leaves the area? The US bases is another matter that was discussed.
And there we've been listening to Turkey's presidential spokesman Ibrahim Kalin talking to journalists in Ankara after his meeting with the US National Security Advisor John Bolton. He said there would be continuing talks with the US, as they are both allies, and that there would be ongoing coordination on the withdrawal of US troops, but that Syrian land must be cleared of all terrorists on the border, regardless of who they are. That does, of course, include Syrian Kurdish fighters that supported the US troops, as well as ISIL.